Beh, vabbè, sempre allora, l'ultimo intervento su questa e poi passiamo a discutere l'altra. Sempre su questa anche? Allora, finiamo la discussione sull'intervento di Alessandro Gori.
Your research is very interesting, and what you told about how is very similar to what we find in the Berber area. I think maybe such a research would be enlarged to pass all Muslim Africa. It's important. I remark what you said about the fact that there are views that the written text is not intended to be read as we do with books without knowledge, written knowledge. They are also written texts are very probably written down in order to help the memory of those who already knew by heart. And it is very crucial also, frankly, if possible, of course, the oral utterance. Because, for instance, one of the texts I found in Tunisia, I found some manuscripts. And luckily, I also found an old man who could recite it or sing it in a traditional way. So it helped understanding some things. In one of the manuscripts, there were some words which were with a long vowel, where it was not expected. All the people who only read this without knowing the text, they know it is incorrect. There is no long vowel. When I heard it was a short vowel, but in that moment, the melody required a long moment. So it's clearly a transcription of oral texts. And I think that maybe your research may be useful for our field of research, and maybe we can also find a way of collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bene, passerei subito a qualche considerazione sulla seconda. Allora, il professor Tedros Abraham.
There are 8 supplementary books. The 27 books of the New Testament, which are accepted by all Christian churches, plus 8 books. But the strange thing is that there is no printed New Testament which has these 8 supplementary books. So the issue of canon, I think, at least in Ethiopia, it is a known issue, but the perspective is a little bit different from the debate in the West. I think as far as the text of the Shepherd of Hermas is concerned, it would be good to see also the role or the influence of the Shepherd of Hermas in the liturgical and hagiographical texts, which are, I think, the best venues where texts in Ethiopia have a status. In the past, there are 2 legislative texts, the Synodos and the Phthanagast, which were the reference to see who is who There is a broad canon and a narrow canon. But I think what matters most is to see what the homemade literature, religious literature, says about the shepherd of Hermes. I have spotted some places, for instance, in the Dubois, but also in the hagiographical texts, that Herma, who is known as Hermanevi, is very much present. You are a young researcher. I wish you all the best. So please, together with the manuscript tradition, if you spare some time also to give a look to Dubois, for example, and to other liturgical compositions, it would be good. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for the references, and I'll certainly look into those. Just on the issue of canon, maybe in a related vein, I think one of the major obstacles at the moment is the 14th century in Ethiopia, because there's evidently some changes in what is considered canonical or scriptural at the time. For example, Ethiopic Maccabees is, if it is, parts of it are dependent upon the Yosipon, then it cannot very well be written before the late 14th century, but already by its earliest attestation in the beginning of the 15th century, it already appears to have some sort of a scriptural status. So by that token, in the 14th century, evidently something can become, or seemingly become, scriptural that didn't exist before. Conversely, for example, with the Ascension of Isaiah, in our 8 earliest copies of Isaiah, at least that I'm aware of, 5 of them have the Ascension of Isaiah suffixed to the proto-canonical book. But of course, in later tradition, this seems to drop out. So I think, again, the question is, can something, does that provide evidence that something can essentially be, if the Ascension of Isaiah can be considered canonical in earlier times, is that perhaps evidence that something can be decanonized or become descripturized as time progresses? It's an interesting paradox, and I think one that won't be easily solved without a considerable amount more of early manuscript evidence.
Noi stiamo ai limiti del tempo, quindi se ci sono una domanda brevissima, short question, Gianfranco Pecadori.
Very short question. I very much appreciated your paper. Did you go through all of the extant book lists in order to check whether the pastor is mentioned?
I've checked some, but not all of the book lists. There are still several, particularly from the EML materials, that need to be checked in that regard. There is one that I didn't mention in Wright's catalog of the British manuscripts in the British Museum, where Hermes is included, but again, it's this case where you have kind of, I want to say, strictly Old Testament, strictly New Testament. Hermes appears some way down the list, along with, I think, the Masafa Malad might be joined in that area. But again, the issue, I think the major issue with canonicity doesn't seem to be the later period. It seems to be the question of whether the status has changed over time, particularly in either the early Solomonic time or perhaps the Zagwe period.
Bene, vi ringrazio per il vostro ascolto e do la parola al professor Fumagalli per...
Please remain one moment. I have some announcement. First of all, thank you to the distinguished speakers and for the discussion. We hope the distinguished speakers of each session could send the final revised text for publication in the new collection of the series of AFRA, or whatever we want to call the African Ambrosian Studies. As a deadline, please be so careful to keep the deadline time of April 30, if I remember correctly. April 30, next year, 6 months, so we hope that you can enlarge. We normally request 20 pages, more or less, in our publications according to following the rules of the editor. But you can receive now our last published 2 days ago, the Asian Studies book. So if you wish to carry with you, you can take as a gift outside by the care of our secretary, Paolo Nicelli. I will introduce you in any case. That first. For the refreshment, it will be very easy just to walk 3 minutes outside in the place, in the square, and you will be refreshed for at least 2 hours. But the refreshment time will require 30 minutes from now. I mean, at least 5 minutes past 11, since we have now to meet for business with the steering committee member, if I remember well, please correct me if I do mistake, Bausi, Brugnatelli, Fiaccadori, Camplani, Emmel, Lafkiwi, and Valsecchi. We are so invited now to sit, of course, in a nice coffee room outside, just to talk about business. It will be very, very, very quickly arranged. So please cover yourself, Gianfranco, and just follow me. Thank you very much. See you for the second session.